You are now listening to the Counterflow Podcast, a place for dissonant voices and unapproved opinions.
You get split in half, but I call the hologram graph. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid, and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Here is your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson.
What's up, you guys? Welcome back once again to the Counterflow Podcast. As always, I'm your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson, coming to you out of Lockhart, Texas. And this is a very fun episode, very unique. I rarely do these, but we had our Philip Ludwell III Southern Orthodox Conference right here in Lockhart, Texas. And this was for the VIP members that paid a little bit extra to be part of a live recording of this podcast. And so for that, we had a separate area from the conference. You're going to see here, I highly recommend that you watch the video production of this on YouTube. Go to YouTube and subscribe to our page, of course. It is Father John Whiteford, my priest, Father Ignatius, Conrad Franz from the World War Now podcast, Rebecca Dillingham, aka Dissident Mama herself, our friend Jim Jatras, the country gentleman, Southern gentleman, and special guest appearing on this one is Father Peter Heers, who is in the audience with his son Gregory. We bring him up as well. Again, you'll do fine if you just listen to the audio here. It's going to be greatly produced, as always. But I think the video production on the YouTube page is going to be neat because we had some great people there helping us to record. That sounds like something Trump would say. The greatest. They're great people. Everyone loves them. But I won't waste your time here giving you an intro. Let's just jump right into this live recording of the Counterflow Podcast at the Philip Ludwell III Southern Orthodox Conference 2024 here in Lockhart, Texas. Let's get to it. Father John Whiteford is going to start us off here, and then we'll get going.
Okay. O heavenly King, Comforter, Spirit of truth, who art everywhere present and fillest all things, treasury of good things and giver of life, come and dwell in us and cleanse us of all impurity and save our souls, O good one.
Thank you, guys, the VIPs. This is a Counterflow podcast. This will actually be out on the feed. It's not a live stream, and this will be out in about 2 weeks. So I'm happy to do this in front of a live audience. Let's see. Raise your hand if you have no idea what the Counterflow podcast is, and be honest. Okay. A long time ago, it was called Death to Tyrants before I was Orthodox. And the only other time I've done a live broadcast was, I would say that must have been April of 2020. So you know what was happening. And we went to a bar that refused people, that disallowed masks and would not close. And so we did a live broadcast or a live recording from that bar back in the day. Anyway, thanks for coming to this. Thanks for the support, the VIP, all of this stuff. We are going to have an esteemed panel. All of these people have been on my show before, so it's very comfortable to have them. Father John, I think more than any of them. But we'll start off with intros. I assume y'all know who these people are, but there's this, again, this is going out to an audience of a lot of people. So we'll start closest to me, Jim Jatras, intro. Well, you give them a little intro about the Southern gentleman that you are, the vice presidential candidate that we needed.
I am what they used to call in the early Soviet Union a bывший человек, a former person, who's somebody who formerly was something or maybe not much of anything. What can I say? I'm one of the few cradle Orthodox in here, of Greek origin 100 years ago. And I come from a military family, went to law school as a big mistake. Then I was in the U.S. diplomatic service for several years, serving in the Office of Soviet Union Affairs in Mexico and other places. Worked at the U.S. Senate and the Republican leadership for 17 years. Retired from government service, was an evil Washington lobbyist for several years. And then now I'm a Virginia country gentleman.
And what else you are is a gold sponsor for this event. So thank you for that. We've got Jim Jatras, James Holloway, and Dean Davenport as the gold sponsors. So I wanted to get that out there. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Miss Rebecca.
Hello, I'm Rebecca Dillingham. I am the founder of the Dissident Mama blog and podcast. I am also a co-founder of the Ludwell Orthodox Fellowship. And I think I was the very last guest on the Death to Tyrants
That's right.
podcast. And I have not been on Counterflow yet. But
Well,
thank you.
you are right now.
Yes, I'm here now. But yes, I'm just happy to be in Texas. I'm married to a native Texan. I'm from North Carolina, and I'm just excited about this entire event. And thank y'all to Lockhart, Texas, and thank you, Buck and Father Iggy, and everybody who's done so much hard work.
Father John.
I'm Father John Whiteford, pastor of St. Jonah Orthodox Church, one of the co-founders of the fellowship, and the editor of the St. Innocent Liturgical Calendar. Okay.
Conrad.
I'm Conrad Franz. I am not as esteemed as the rest of these people on this panel, but I have the unfortunate reality of having to call myself a journalist. So I host a show called World War Now. It's a podcast about geopolitics from an Orthodox perspective. And I may have been born in Virginia, but my dad brought a cup of soil from Texas and put it under the bed. So I'm a Texan, and I've been here for a while. So proud to be from Texas, and it's an honor to be here.
Honor to have you. Father Ignatius.
Hey, good evening, everyone. I am Father Ignatius Lozano. I'm the priest in charge of St. Andrew, the First Called Orthodox Mission here in Lockhart, Texas. Pretty much everybody calls me Father Iggy, so please feel free to do so. I am your host, though not your humble narrator of the Counterflow podcast. Instead, I am going to be your chef this weekend, and so please enjoy all the food, all the cocktails, and so on and so forth. Everything that y'all are doing, especially for this VIP event, is going to help build the second temple of St. Andrew's Orthodox Church. Now, as all of you will see tomorrow evening at Vespers and certainly Sunday morning at Divine Liturgy, if you stay with us, we are a small but very fast-growing parish here in Central Texas. We are kind of an island unto ourselves out here in the middle of the boondocks, and so it is very important to us that we represent Orthodox Christianity within Central Texas and kind of in the larger world. So any questions that I can answer for you, please feel free to address me. Matushka is not able to be with us this weekend. She is a speech and debate coach, and she is at a tournament in Lavernia. But she sends her regrets, and so I'm happy to represent us both. Welcome.
And I should do a special thank you for being here, and hello to all of the clergy and the audience, and Father Filaret, that talk today, just wonderful, wonderful. And Abbot Mark, good to see you, sir. Father Peter Heers, my tour guide of my spiritual guide in Mount Athos. With now we have a special bond, and Gregory with him too, of course. So good to see all of you guys here. I hope I didn't miss any clergy. I don't believe I did. And Ben Dixon, now the man that runs this entire organization, this event. Thank you for being here, and thank you for doing this too. Chief, yeah. I see, Michael Sisko, you in here still? Mm-hmm. There he is.
There he is.
I should give him a special shout out because as of right now, this is the first time that the Texas Monthly 1, 2, 3, 4 have been in the same room. And so it's good to see you guys. We should probably get a picture. Maybe Texas Monthly can do another piece on us, a loving piece like they did. So speaking of converts, I wanted to talk to each of you. You all have unique experiences about this. There's only one person that's not a convert sitting up here. But I want to talk about, there's obviously a boom, even in relatively small one if you're talking about other denominations or religions, if you will. But there is a boom within Orthodox Christianity. I'm part of it. Conrad's part of it. And I would like to ask you each about what the view of that is from your perspective and possible downfalls that new converts could possibly fall into, traps along the way, things to watch out for, red flags, things that we tend to do maybe online, be too online, ortho bros, all of this kind of stuff. Mr. Jim Jatras.
Well, first off, let me state that even though I am the only cradle up here, my formation in some ways is more like a convert, that I grew up in a Greek-American family, but in the military, not in an Orthodox community. And it was only really when I got to law school at a Jesuit institution that I looked into the heart of darkness and said, oh, wait, this can't be right. And went screaming back into the church, which luckily was right there for me. Also my wife's background. So in some ways, I came to the faith late, even though I was born into it. So I want to jump really just to the pitfalls, and just one in particular I think needs to be mentioned, is a lot of people will come into Orthodoxy, especially young men, who've been sold lies all their lives about everything. And they sometimes will come to the church and say, aha, I finally found something that's true. But they're coming with all the brokenness they experienced in the world, and they're coming almost like they're joining an ideological club where the truth is, as opposed to where falsehood is really in your soul and your deepest part of your being. And when they come in here then and then find out, well, the rest of us are just as flawed as you are, and even though we're the right church, we'll have all the wrong people in it. And you're going to experience the same problems in life, not only the ones that you bring in, but the one everybody else has. That can be discouraging for them, and they can get disillusioned, or they can fall into very spiritual traps that are set for them. And I think people need to be prepared for that experience. They need to know that it's going to be a long and rocky struggle with lots of ups and downs, but you only will know at the end of that process as you look back on your life and say, hey, I'm not the person I was. I'm not in the place where I was. And they have to be prepared for that. This is not a club. It's not an ideology. It's not a political movement. It's a church. It's a body. It's life itself. And that's what they have to prepare themselves for before they come in. That's the main pitfall I would point out.
That's well said. I suspect we can just go down the line like this and let you each.
A lot of converts come in, I would say most, and I was one of these people, rose-colored glasses, right? You think everything's going to be perfect, and it's the hospital, and it is, but the hospital has many sick people. So I was talking with my friend Arlen tonight, wherever she is in this room. There will be suffering, and Orthodoxy that I have learned about through experience and through my father confessor is a marathon and not a sprint. And it is a daily struggle. And Arlen said that, suffering is sanctifying. And, to people wanting like a quick fix or something like instant gratification, Orthodoxy's not your cup of tea. But if you want the opposite of that and you want truth, and it is the true church, it's the place to be. But I think it's Father Seraphim Rose that says, Orthodoxy is not about being comfortable. That's a paraphrase, but it's not. And it can be very uncomfortable, but it's the truth. And it's a sanctifying thing as we go through it. And that's why we all need each other. So,
what I would point out is to amplify what Jim was saying about it Orthodoxy not being an ideology is I think a lot of people, because they discover Orthodoxy in sort of an intellectual way, think of it as an ideology. And if you think about it that way, you can also start going down the wrong road to some sort of off-the-wall views about what Orthodoxy is all about. But Orthodoxy is really a way of life. And so if you want to understand Orthodoxy, the only way you're going to do it is by coming to the services and doing the services and getting to know the old ladies in the church that have been Orthodox all their life and listen to them tell their stories, and because it's a life, and it's certainly not it's not going to solve every problem you have right off the bat. And so if you come in thinking that everything's going to go away that was a problem before, that's not going to happen. But it is where the truth is, and if you approach it as a lifestyle and you start really digging into the worshiping life of the church, that's where you're going to find the gold nuggets.
I completely agree with everything that's been said, of course, and I guess the only thing, if I had anything to add, and this is sort of a problem you could almost apply to most forms of Christianity, religions, heterodox or not, but there's, the church is one of the few places where, like Jim said, it's not a club, it's not an ideology where just because someone, isn't really liked by everybody there, you can't just ask them to leave because you don't like them. That's one of the only places. The church is one of the places where you just can't do that because everybody, is brought in and gets the medicine. And, you got to get pretty far on the formal heresy track to actually get, totally booted out, right? So it's not the most exclusive club, you could say, and everybody eventually comes to blows with, whether it's somebody or like Jim is mentioning, maybe bishops or priests, or more likely somebody at your parish that, suddenly makes you think maybe our orthodoxy isn't perfect. I've run into these, people that I don't like, and that's going to be a big part of it. So I think, when you run into people you don't like in the church, just instead of getting mad at the church, be just glad that they're in the church, because that's the best place for them to be, right?
Okay, well, I would like to note at the outset of this that I don't have any tattoos. Now, Buck has got some glorious ones. Ben has got some great ones. If I were going to get a tattoo, I would have it read what I tell as many people as will listen to me. May God deliver us all from internet orthodoxy.
Wait a second.
Because so much of what we encounter, and we are 99% a convert parish. I think my daughter and maybe two other people are the only ones who at this point are cradle Orthodox, is please do not take what you see on Facebook, what you see on Twitter, what you see on, God forbid, Snapchat or Instagram as being an authentic expression of the Orthodox faith. And now I say that because there are some wonderful things that take place on there. There are wonderful quotes of the fathers. There are wonderful icons. Myself, I am beloved of memes. Preach the gospel. When necessary, use memes. But that being said, there is so much more to our faith than can be gotten in a 5-minute session on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or one of those, that there is so much for our converts to really see and experience and learn for themselves that is not just in quips and phrases. Because a lot of what we encounter out there in the world when we're speaking with Roman Catholics, Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, so on and so forth, is not going to be relatable in these small little clips and things that we have received, but it's going to be rather in that lived experience of the learning process of becoming and really living that Orthodox faith. So that's my little bit there.
Well said. I should mention, I forgot to do this so far. There's paper right here, a bunch of sheets of paper, and a pen. If you've got a question for anyone up here, write it down on that. Give it to Chris, my producer here. He'll give it to me. We don't have a mic to pass around, basically, so I'll read the question and whatnot. So with that out of the way, in this same topic, one of the things I was talking with Father Peter about, and I don't think this is secret by any means, this is a concern that he was speaking about, because we do have this somewhat explosion of orthodoxy. And is there an issue, and I'll ask the two priests this, is there an issue where you see or you're concerned about improper catechism because so many people are coming in? Are we going to be facing like a, let's see, just like where a woke person, for lack of a better terms, a woke person comes in and, I'm this now, and they immediately think that they've got the answers, and they're improperly catechized, or going out saying things that are improper because maybe their heart wasn't into it. We don't understand the reasoning. I'm not trying to put something on someone else that we don't know, but is there an issue with catechism being improper? Is that a concern to you, Father John?
Well, catechism quality varies from parish to parish a lot. And fortunately, in our parish, I have a guy who was going through the Antiochian House of Studies, and as a project, he decided to come up with a catechetical program and then implement it. And so if you're familiar with J. Vernon McGee's Through the Bible program, they used to talk about the Bible bus. Every 3 years, you hop on the Bible bus, and after 3 years, you've gone through the whole Bible. The way we do catechesis now is we do Google Meet sessions every other week. And if you hop on the catechism bus, it'll eventually wrap back around to the parts that you missed, because we're just going through the Law of God by Father Daniel Sasoyev and repeating it. And I think it's been pretty effective. Some parishes have probably better. I know Father Josiah Tranum, I think, does catechesis and everything else, as good as anything I've seen. He spoke at our diocesan conference about what they did, and I wish that I'd asked him how he got from when his parish wasn't huge to be able to implement that system, because he obviously didn't start off with the number of people he's got now working on that, but he probably does it as good as anybody.
How long is catechesis at your parish?
It varies because you have people who study Orthodoxy for a year and maybe they were going to another parish or something like that, and then they come to my parish. But around a year roughly. I think it's good for people to experience the cycle of services. And my main thing is I want to make sure that they know what they're getting into, so that it's not like after they're baptized, they say, I didn't know I had to venerate icons. What was that all about? I think people should know what they're getting into before they get to that point.
So at least at St. Andrews, the process is about a year long. And the primary reason for that is really, as Father John said, is do you know what you're getting into? Do you accept all these things that we're asking you to believe? And are you properly formulated in the beliefs of an Orthodox Christian? So one of the things is, we have found that there have been some people that have attended other jurisdictions and other states and so on, and they've heard certain things. And they go, well, I feel I have to believe this. And we go, well, maybe not exactly. Or this is how I have been told to fast. And we go, well, maybe you don't want to quite do it that way or not that soon or so on. And so really, we are blessed and cursed in a way being in this small town, in that we're blessed in that we have relatively few catechumens. I would say a couple dozen every year. But we are kind of cursed in that we don't have a lot more of them, in the sense that we have taken our time to kind of develop these people, really make sure that they are formulated in what they believe. We have a lot of people that are coming from, this is something new to me, no background whatsoever, no religious belief. We've had folks from transcendental meditation. We've had people from theistic Satanism, believe it or not, Messianic Judaism, every background you can imagine. And a lot of people who have said, I've never believed anything at all, that are now coming to the church with pretty good rapidity. And they are coming in such a way that they go, there is something more in this life. I don't have it with my current belief or lack thereof, and I really want to develop that. And that's one of those things that, as much as we want to get them into the church, as quickly as we want to present them to the mysteries so that they can really experience their faith, we don't want to rush it to such a point that they don't have a good foundation in why they're doing these things. And so that's really kind of been the focus at our parish.
Jim, I'd like your thoughts on this as well.
Honestly, I don't think I'm qualified to talk about it. I still teach an online catechesis class for my old Greek parish before I came to St. Herman's, and I do that online. And I don't think there is one size fits all. You have to just sort of take the people where they are, try to answer their questions, and be patient with them, and realize that, look, they're an awful, like getting back to the cradle thing, there are an awful lot of cradles that were never properly catechized. They don't know a thing. I mean, very often, at least on a cognitive level, converts learn a lot more because they're instructed. Nobody ever instructed a lot of these cradles. On the other hand, a lot of them have a lot of the instinctual body language, you might say the organic aspects of life in the church that you don't really learn in your head. You have to sort of pick them up by osmosis over the years. So yeah, it's a challenge for us, and it's a good one to have. I don't know, I sort of sometimes wonder what the kind of transformation is we're going in the church in this country, with many of the people from the traditional ethnic backgrounds sort of falling away from the church as they go the way of the rest of American society. At the same time, all the wreckage and flotsam and jetsam of America is coming into the church. So I think we're going through a very historic period, a real transformation of the church that none of us knows what it's going to look like in 20, 30, 100 years.
Hey, Buck, may I add to that really quick?
Yes, sir.
So something that I had a conversation with a young lady recently she would read something in her Bible and she would record a video and she would send it to me and go, am I right on this? And I would try and say, I'd really like you to speak with your godmother and some of the folks in the parish. And she would say, well, you're the priest. You should know more about this than anybody else. I go, well, you've got to understand that within most American Orthodox parishes, 90% of us being converts, we have had to spend a significant amount of time learning about our faith, learning about the scriptures, learning about how those scriptures are interpreted in the light of orthodoxy and so on. And so really we have a significant benefit, I think, in a lot of our parishes that almost everybody there is a resource and really should be tapped for the purposes of our catechesis. And if we're not doing that, we're missing out on a significant opportunity that is developing people throughout the rest of the country.
There's been, let's say, friends contact me and say, my priest has told me he can't be my spiritual father. He's not cut out for it or prepped for it or something along those lines. I want to hear the priest's thoughts on that and the importance of a spiritual father, or in someone in those shoes go, well, you still go to church, he's still your priest, and the spiritual direction doesn't necessarily have to be there in this case. What would a person like that do? What are your thoughts, Father John?
Well, the thing is, when people talk about a spiritual father, a lot of times they mean different things by that, because a parish priest that hears your confession is probably not a starets or a gerunda, but if they're the priest that you go to confession to, you can say that's your spiritual father. But if you happen to be visiting another parish and you need to go to confession, there's no reason you can't go to confession to another priest. But sometimes people develop a very good relationship with a particular priest, and they want to keep going to that priest for confession. And then there are really the elders that, if you had such a person that you were able to go to confession to, that would be a spiritual father on a very different level. So you just have to understand those differences. I know in some jurisdictions, priests are not immediately given a blessing to hear confessions, and so that could be part of what was going on there. In the Russian Church abroad, they don't do that. But I know the Greeks did that because back during the Turkish period, there were lots of priests that were really not educated. And so they were able to do the services, and they were given a blessing to do that, but not to preach or to hear confessions. And so that's why you had priests from monasteries that would travel around and hear people's confessions. But the Russian Church abroad doesn't do it that way. If you're a priest, you're able to hear confessions.
Mm-hmm. Father Iggy?
So I'll say it in a little different sense. I mean, Father John is my spiritual father, and I'm so sorry. But beyond that, I think really most of what a spiritual father should serve to do in a parish context, at least in the context of us being a fairly small mission parish out here in the sticks, it is someone who you can not only make your confession to, but if you've got further concerns beyond that regarding the extenuating circumstances around a confession, or those things of what should I be reading to rid myself of these passions, or how do I increase in my spiritual life, my prayer life, how do I get more rigorous in my fasting, this is someone that you should feel comfortable in, that like your very own father is there with your best interests in mind to develop you spiritually and physically, and in kind of that hypostatic way that those things are going to go together to really make you the best Orthodox Christian you can be. Now, are they infallible? Far from it. Are they going to be perhaps better at least situated to look at your situation somewhat objectively and guide you in a way that is going to be for your spiritual edification? I think so, generally. That being said, a lot of us, especially those of us priests who are married priests, we are very much in the world. 90% of us, I think, have secular jobs, and we have these other concerns. It is worth seeking out our monastic clergy as well. Definitely worth seeking them out with priority, I would say, and saying, how should I live for that portion of my life where I am not a part of the world? That is to say, those spiritual aspects, how do I direct and discern those in such a way that they're going to be edifying to me and those around me? And so, it's not, as Father John said, necessarily going to be your parish priest or someone that's right there in your parish. And so you should look around for the best fit for you and what you need in your direction.
Jim?
There are many levels to this. Father John mentioned, there's the difference between the priest who's the confessor of your parish and a true spiritual father, a starets or a yeronda. Father Iggy mentioned you talk to the old ladies of the parish who know a lot more than you do. In my case, I'm not anybody's spiritual father and don't ever expect to be. I certainly hope not. But I'll tell you, sometimes godfather duty can be pretty tough, because, sometimes when you're the sponsor, it's pretty pro forma. Sometimes you're not. And, people come to you with stuff they don't bring to their own parents. It's not necessarily things on the deepest spiritual level, but stuff about their lives that you've got to stand up and take the arrows, because there's nobody else but you there to do it. And again, I think that's part of how in the church we all have to be responsible and bear one another's burdens.
Can I say something about good fits? So Father John is my spiritual father / father confessor, and I live in North Carolina, and he lives in Texas. So American Orthodoxy is kind of wacky like that. Sometimes you're doing your confession on Signal or on Zoom, and then you have to get an absolution from the priest at the parish.
And from the NSA.
Yeah.
Nice.
So who said it's not one size fits all? I would say that's kind of just my experience with Orthodoxy and definitely American Orthodoxy. But yes, find somebody who will truly be a shepherd and really care about you and your family. And, that's who your spiritual father is.
Mm-hmm. And to Jim's point, I'd like to think that my NSA and FBI agents, because I'm sure I have one of each at least, are getting sort of accidentally Christ-pilled just reading my posts. We're going to hope.
For content creators, I have a question. Conrad, we'll start with you. Is there for lack of a better term, pressure that you create content and you identify yourself as an Orthodox Christian, people understand that, to shy away from certain topics, words, language, etc.?
I was literally thinking about, and something had to do with this question just in my head. So great question. Yeah. But
we're here still.
Ironically, it's more of these intra-church issues that to people on the outside would be like, why is that controversial? I'm more scared to talk about that stuff because, people at the parish and people this, that, or the other, there's all these issues, who are you going to Mount Athos with, all these other things. But characters like this guy, who knows who we're all on lists and everything. But ironically, I've found that when it comes to, at least for politics related things, I remember I was catechized at a totally ethnic Antiochian parish in Brooklyn. Everyone there was Syrian. And, they were looking at this American guy a little bit shady, like, what's he doing? He probably doesn't understand what's really going on in Syria. And then I was talking to some of them, and I let it slip that I knew that Israel funded ISIS, and they were like, this guy, and they're like, oh, here, have something to drink, like, bring him in. So there's all these, so that kind of stuff I actually feel very free to talk about when stuff that, in more polite American society would be considered controversial or this, that, or the other. I feel the Orthodox audience, the Orthodox people are very willing, even if they disagree, to understand things and hash these things out. But then when it comes to more niche topics, sometimes I'm like, I've got somebody that believes this about the Western Rite, that believes that or this, I'm just going to leave this. I don't need to talk about this on the show, so I'll let some of those things lie, leave those to the wonderful priests among us to debate. But I think actually, as far as, politically correct policing myself, I find being Orthodox is totally freeing.
Rebecca?
Well, when I started my blog in 2016, I was a Protestant. So I did not come into the church until December 2017. So for me, it was just, an evolution, the next natural step. So I had done my blog, under a pen name, under a pseudonym, but I always, even as a Protestant, was like, I'm going to get doxxed one day. So make darn sure whatever you say, Rebecca, is something that you would want your name by, eventually. So that served me well when I got doxxed in May 2020. Good times. But by that point, I was already Orthodox. And it's kind of like the question I asked earlier of Father Filaret. We kind of do everything through the Orthodox lens. So you blog through the Orthodox lens. When you start a podcast in April 2020, you do that through the Orthodox lens. So, I don't always talk about Orthodox things, but I'm Orthodox. So when I craft questions and think about questions I want to ask or follow-ups or research people, I'm just Orthodox. It's holistic.
Jim, real quick, you're the one closest to me. Look who's texting me. Will you say this? Tell them.
You want me to read it for you? You can read it.
Donald Trump.
What? Oh, I can't read it. It's too small. You read it.
It just says maybe Donald Trump. Let me see.
Well, tell him we need a second temple.
Yeah. No, he's only interested in the third
money.
temple. What I keep telling you.
We're willing to call it St. Donald the Orange.
Gotcha. This is one that's been asked this weekend to me. Father John, your son-in-law, did a very good job discussing this, in my personal opinion, and the Protestant gentleman who is asking the question. But let's get some thoughts on something that's not controversial at all. Toll houses.
Find cookies.
Well, the topic is very controversial because when you talk about toll houses, immediately people focus on that one image. But what you have to understand is the toll houses are simply one image that's used by the fathers to talk about something that they use other images for. And there was a Protestant patristic scholar who wrote something, I believe it was for, public orthodoxy, so-called, and he began by saying, the toll house idea is very recent and it's not ancient, blah, 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 and he was attacking it. But he said, but when it comes to demons contesting the souls of the recently departed, there's a lot of patristic evidence for that. Well, hey, dummy. That's what we're talking about. That's what we're talking about. But he didn't get that because he got so focused on this one image, and I think that's a big part of the problem. And there are so many things in the fathers, and you even find it in the scriptures, that point to the very same thing. So don't get hung up on that particular image because it's just simply one. Because tax collectors were hated in the ancient world because not only could they take your money, but they could literally have you thrown in prison, sold into slavery, destroy your life, and they often did that. And so people had this fear, and so comparing demons with tax collectors that had that potential to destroy you was a very vivid image in the ancient world.
I think there's a significant connection to the modern IRS as well.
Yes.
But a much less erudite take on this, I will say that most of my Toll House talk has to do with chocolate chips and not demons. But as I usually tell folks, if you want to read the book, read the book. There's a lot of detail in there. There's a lot for you. But generally speaking, if you live a life that is subject to the Orthodox mindset, you have nothing to worry about from the toll houses. Now, therein lies the rub, because I would say it is much more difficult to actually ascribe to an Orthodox mindset and a way of life than to fight off demons trying to pull you down towards the dark place. So it kind of ends up one of those things of live the best we can, and some of the theological minutia, if you're going to deal with it, let's deal with it much later in your Orthodox journey than, let's say the first 10 or 15 years. Let's save that one for towards the end of life, or for that bad diagnosis, or for one of those things. But in general, I tell people, follow the guidance that you find within the Gospels, and the toll houses should not concern you.
Teaching this online class for catechumens, this topic, not that toll houses doesn't come up, but what happens when you die comes up a lot. And it's something you can't put off till they're about to die. They want to know. And in my experience, I don't think I've ever found a critic of the toll houses who didn't over-literalize and paint this caricature of a wooden booth in the sky, stuff like that, rather than, as Father John said, there, when you die, it's not necessarily all, sweetness and roses. There's a struggle that goes on, and people have to understand that, in the particular judgment. And if you describe it in those terms, and we don't know exactly what it looks like, we have these symbols that are used sometimes that are metaphors for explaining what that period of testing looks like. It's not that big of a deal if you put it in those terms. And that's why I think, I don't know why some people insist on making it a shibboleth to say, oh, well, that's all fairy tale, that's just Orthodox purgatory and nonsense like that. It really isn't that big of a deal if we put it in those terms, but it's something I think is necessary because so many people from outside of the Orthodox Church have this sense that when you die, you're good for heaven or you're going to go directly to hell. Do not pay $200 to get out of hell. Whatever it is, it's something I think we need to address, but put it in proper context.
Well said. This is from someone in the audience. This is a good one. St. Paisios said that one day America will be holy. And it seems that in every place that Orthodoxy has taken root and flourished, it has been preceded by persecution and martyrdom. In order for St. Paisios' prophecy to pass and for Orthodoxy to take root in the South and America generally, is it likely that a time of persecution and even martyrdom will happen? Well, we can just go in order this time. Jim?
Oh, thanks.
It's lighthearted.
I don't want to give away my talk for tomorrow, but essentially it's about the recognition that this country is likely to go through some very tough times in the near future, that the republic as it was crafted in 1787 simply doesn't exist anymore and frankly hasn't existed in a long time, and that the future of the American nation, as Father Filaret quoted me, as an ethnos, is very much at question. And one way or another, it's going to be a very difficult future for us. So that time of ordeal is coming one way or another. Whether that leads to something holy at the end of it, Elder Ignatius of Harbin said that what began in this 1930s, what began in Russia will end in America. And we don't really know what that means, exactly what that's going to look like. But one way or another, it's not going to be pleasant. And just as Russia very eventually emerged from that very difficult ordeal in a way that would not have been foreseeable to anybody in the 1930s, I think America can possibly, some kind of America that we can't even foresee, emerge from that. But whether that's in a short period of time, a very long period of time, how much of America is left at that point, I don't think any of us can say at this point.
What was the question? Because Jim and I were talking about martinis. So what am I answering?
Oh.
If Orthodoxy is going to take hold here?
Yeah, it's referencing St. Paisios saying that America will be holy. And
are we going to be persecuted?
Okay. Correct. There you go.
Yes, we're going to be persecuted. We already are in various ways. It's not physical, but again, Father Seraphim Rose says it's going to be psychological martyrdom, whether we're martyred or not. We all live in clown world. We know that gaslighting is real, and it's a struggle already. But I'm a secessionist, so I don't even think there's a thing called America. So I don't even know how to answer that question. But I will say that there are enclaves in America, and not just states, but enclaves within enclaves within enclaves. We know that, there can be a blue state, but there are red parts to it or whatever. The gates of hell will not prevail, but that can be one guy on a pillar. We don't know. So, it's going to get rough, and we got to get ready. But, Orthodoxy is the way to do it because it is the true church. And my very first comment was about suffering and how Orthodoxy is not easy. But the silver lining to all of that, on top of it being the truth, is that you know who your friends are, and there's constant wheat and chaff moments, and you have to embrace those instead of being hurt by them. They're actually very liberating. That's how I look at them.
Well, Jim mentioned the quote from the Elder Ignatius of Harbin. I knew some people from Harbin that remembered the quote as, "What began in Russia will end in America, but it will be worse."
Oh, great.
And
That's the PS.
That's not what you see in print in any place I've seen it, but that's what I was told. What I routinely remind people in my parish about is that they need to prepare for persecution. And if it turns out that that has an ironic meaning, and it doesn't mean that we're going to actually go through something like or worse than the Soviet Union was in the really dark days of the 20s and the 30s. If you're prepared for persecution, you'll just get to die in your bed peacefully, and you'll go to heaven because you'll have lived a holy life. But if you're not prepared and the persecution comes, you're going to wish that you had been, because and if you live along the Gulf Coast, you know that when the hurricane's in the Gulf and they're telling you it's going to be hitting in 12 hours, it's too late for you to have your trees trimmed so they don't fall on your house. It's too late for you to go get a bunch of groceries because you're going to just find a couple of cans of pork and beans on the shelf. You have to prepare ahead of time for that. And I think that preparing for persecution is a very similar thing. You have time now where you can learn how to do the services at home in case you don't have a church to go to. You can have service books. You can make sure that you have the means of educating your children in the faith, and you're preparing yourself and your family spiritually for that. And if you wait until it's too late, you're going to wish that you had. And I think it was Saint Nectarius of Optina who said there will be a famine of books. And so buy books, because the day will come when you won't be able to buy them no matter how much money you have. And so I would suggest make sure that you've got the books that you'll need or wish that you had when you're under persecution now, while you can still get them.
I think when it comes to persecution, it's important as Americans to look at, our government is actively funding a persecution of Orthodox Christians as we speak right now in Ukraine. So if you want to know what that could look like, there's some pretty great examples you could see of how a supposedly modern government could go about depriving people of their places of worship and the sacraments and all of these other things. But I've been traveling around the Orthodox world a lot recently. I've been to Russia and Athos and Cyprus, and I've talked to a lot of people that come from different parts of the Orthodox world, and I've heard a pretty consistent message, unfortunately, and that's that it's not looking good for America, and it's not going to get better. And if it does get better, it's going to get worse before it does get better. I've heard that from people in Russia that are trying to get Americans and Orthodox people to move to Russia because they view them as, good people, good human capital that they would like to see escape what could come to America. I've heard this from elders at monasteries in Cyprus. I heard this from someone like Metropolitan Theophitos of Morphu, who talked to saints like the future Saint Eldris Galactia, and these other people have recently reposed elders and whatnot have all said that some very unfortunate things could be coming. I know Elder Ephraim told some of his spiritual children that, California and the West Coast could easily be sinking into the ocean. And I know people joke that if it wasn't for St. John Maximovich and some of these other things, that would have already happened. But I think, all sorts of people have warned about everything from civil war to geophysical phenomenon killing large swaths of people to us getting involved in international bomb throwing competitions and these other things. So I think everybody needs to prepare insofar as all of those things are in theory possible. Everything's on the table. We're in uncharted territory. My show purports that we're already in the midst of the Third World War. And Metropolitan Theophitos, who is a big inspiration for me, he's always made the point to say that the purpose of things like prophecies and these types of warnings are to inspire repentance and to inspire repentance among people that have been belligerently not repenting without these kinds of dire warnings. So we know that the prayer of a righteous man availeth much. I'm extremely grateful that we have even the 17 and the other monasteries, of course, like Holy Cross and the others, that the small monastic deposit we do have in America, because I fear that without that, things would have already gone south sooner than they already have.
Well, in a number of ways, the conference is here this year because I asked for it to be, because we got to experience some persecution. A couple of years ago, the Confederate monument that was on the square here in Lockhart in Caldwell County, as they are in a number of small Texas towns and towns throughout the South, was challenged by some folks who mysteriously appeared, and they had a big problem with it, and they gathered a group of people to say it had to be moved, and by God, they did move it to the predominantly black part of town. Whoops. That being said, it was a lot of this of, well, you need to hide yourself. And you need to not express this Southern idea of orthodoxy or of traditional Christianity or anything like that. And we said, yeah, we're going to anyway. We've been doing this for 2,000 years. We're slow to learn new things. We're going to keep doing this. And on one of the Sundays, it happened to be a Sunday that they were planning a BLM march on the square. We said, well, we're going to do an icon procession on the square. Gosh, it's scheduled at the same time. And we did that with our largely multi-ethnic parish, much more ethnically diverse than most of them in town. And we went around that same square where they had removed that monument, and we said, you know, there is more to this than an idea that is either ossified or is that kind of put up on a pedestal. There is more to this, and what that is it is the people. And those people are open to persecution. Those people are used to persecution because we have a number of people in Orthodoxy, as you well know, that persecution's kind of our thing. We've been going through this for a very long time. It is nothing new to us. It is nothing that we're going to shy away from. And rather than running from it, we go, hey, let us show you what else we can do. And I think there is a wonderful opportunity, especially here in the South, where, you know, one of the things that I know some of the parishes here we kind of struggle with is we are lone outposts. I am an hour away from every other canonical Orthodox parish in any direction. Father John's somewhat slightly closer to some of the other ones, but most of our parishes here, we are geographically isolated. We are, to some extent, ethnographically isolated. And so we really depend on this bastion of our faith to say, this is something that is not going anywhere. And in a great part of the world, this has been here for a long time, and it will outlast you. You can persecute it, and you can persecute it in the name of American Protestant exceptionalism or whatever you like, but it's going to hold steady, and it's going to outlast that persecution no matter what you do. So I think a lot of the folks that have come to the parish within the past couple of years, especially in the wake of all of these, you know, protests and things that are going on, have said, I want to be part of the thing that lasts. I want to be part of the thing that stands against the popular opinion, and I want to be part of the thing that is going to be here when all of these things that we say are going to happen, when all of the saints tell us this will come to pass. We want to be part of it when it does and not come to it lately. So there's a wonderful opportunity, I think.
Can I add something, Buck?
Certainly.
It's something I've written about in a blog, and I contributed a chapter to a book called The Honorable Cause. Southern people are used to suffering, right? We all live in the modern world, and we've talked about the suffering we have now, but one of the reasons we honor our ancestors, besides they were supposed to honor our ancestors, we stand on the shoulders of giants, spiritually, familially, but Southern people went through it. I mean, Reconstruction was horrible. Before that, the war was horrible. I mean, the things that our ancestors lived through and persevered and kept their faith, we should be in awe of it. They were not Orthodox, but they were a little O-Orthodox in many cases, and it was only their love of Christ that got them through it. I mean, so, yeah, Orthodoxy, persecution's kind of our thing, but being Southern, that's kind of our thing too. So we just have the best of both worlds here, which is why the South is just a perfect fit.
Mm-hmm. I have to tell you about something to help you out. The world's largest offshore event taking place entirely online. You hear that, online, from October 7th through 11th. It's going to be put on by our friend Mikkel Thorop, host of the Expat Money Show, the highly sought-after expat consultant with over 2 decades of experience. In this offshore event, online, like we said, you will discover why international diversification is a must for those looking to preserve their liberty and wealth. You will learn everything you need to know about crafting your perfect Plan B. We all should have that. Maybe Plan C, Plan D, and so on. How to quickly acquire a second passport, diversify your finances offshore, invest in international real estate, and get in-depth insights on geopolitics from world-renowned experts. And these are the actual real experts, not the trust the experts kind that we've been promised to trust. Headline speakers include Dr. Ron Paul, Doug Casey, friend of the show Scott Horton, Tom Woods, Mark Faber, Tom Luongo. A lot of those names have been on this show, so you guys are going to want to tune into this online, like we said, October 7th through 11th. To reserve your complimentary ticket, head over to expatmoneysummit.com. That is expatmoneysummit.com. Let's get back to the show. I want to ask Conrad and Father John this. Conrad, you alluded to it a while ago. I have done, you have done. This could be a multi-hour podcast just on this topic. But for people listening, for those here that don't follow every news article on this topic, what is happening in Ukraine with the Orthodox Church? We understand, I hope we understand that this country's tax dollars are going to that and what's happening. But Father John, I'll start with you. What's going on with the Orthodox Church there?
Well, to make a long story short, we have geniuses that are running our country that don't care anything about Orthodox theology or Orthodox ecclesiology. They only care about power, and they see the Orthodox Church as a means by which Russia has influence on a big chunk of the world. And so they're actively trying to create a schism in the Orthodox Church, and Ukraine is ground zero for that. And so they use the sway they have over the ecumenical patriarchate, unfortunately, to recognize a group of schismatics. And most recently, the Ukrainian parliament has actually outlawed the canonical church. They put a 9-month period to allow the canonical church to come to some kind of terms, basically with the schismatics or with the ecumenical patriarchate, which is essentially just a different face of the same thing. And I think one of the reasons why they did that is because they want to kick the can past the election, because they know that if Kamala Harris wins, they can continue on what they've been doing. And if Donald Trump wins, whatever you might think about him, this is just a fact. J.D. Vance has specifically staked out his position on this, that he's opposed to the persecution of the canonical church. And so they think they will lose funding if they do that. So probably if Donald Trump is elected, they'll find some way to forget that they outlawed this church and at least not overtly crush them. But they certainly will do that if they wind up with Kamala Harris in the White House.
Conrad?
Yeah, Father John pretty much laid it out. There's, before the Tomos of Autocephalys, it's called, that the EP gave to the schismatic group in 2018, I believe, there were even competing schismatic groups in Ukraine as to who was trying to cleave Ukrainian nationalists away from the canonical church, which the vast majority of Ukrainians are part of. And one of those groups was legitimized by the ecumenical patriarch. Many people would cite to you that there are millions of dollars were supposedly transferred from the State Department to the Patriarch Bartholomew and these other things to facilitate something like this happening. So obviously it's a pretty dark stain on the church right now. Of course, clergy from Go Arch and Rocor and these places aren't able to be in communion as they once were in the same way and concelebrate and whatnot. So it's really unfortunate. And on the ground, you see these horrible videos coming out of Ukraine where local police or these militia forces that, everyone else has been conscripted out to the front line. So there's no men to protect these parishes half the time. And these groups of people will storm through the doors. They'll beat up the priests. They'll take people out. They'll change the locks on the door. And at best, those people will be forced to worship in some other location. At worst, the priest himself will be arrested. Obviously, the abbot of the Kiev Caves, Lavra, Metropolitan Paul, he was imprisoned. Metropolitan Longin, who is a saintly bishop of Ukraine, has been beaten half to death and arrested, and all sorts of other times. Metropolitan Jonathan, Metropolitan Onufri himself, is enduring all sorts of legal persecution in the midst of all of this. So it's really one of the craziest things to witness in a modern society. Not that any of us here had any illusions that we lived in some inherently just world, but the fact that they've kind of thrown off all the illusions and aspersions and are just going full out with the support of a crackdown on religious freedom, which is supposedly a pillar of the West, is it's quite eye-opening to people, and it makes you realize how could all these people go, how could everyone sit by while something like this happens? Well, this is exactly how. I mean, how many people do you know that even know this is happening?
Jim?
Just very briefly, I want to emphasize that this is all being done by a regime that would not be in power for a day if it weren't for American money and American weapons. These are your tax dollars at work here. And, as one of the staff people at the Senate who helped draft the International Religious Freedom Act back in 1999 that supposedly was going to put the United States on the side of religious freedom, it simply turned into another boondoggle for saying, we like these people, we're going to give them a pass on anything they do, like, say, the regime in Kiev, as opposed to, we don't like these people, here's another club we can beat them with and say, oh, they did this, that, they're religious freedom violators. So it just shows you just how hypocritical our government is about these things, that they pretend they're these principal defenders of human rights, including religious freedom, and instead it's purely Machiavellian, and these are our guys, they can do anything they want, we give them a blank check and we don't care.
Anyone else on this one?
It's the Yankee Empire.
It is that. It is that.
Yeah, I mean, think about it.
Yes.
Killing your own people from 1861 to 1865 in the Reconstruction. I mean, I'm a broken record on this. If you do that to your own people, why would you not do it to foreigners?
Right.
I mean, it's just a carbon copy. And sorry, that's my thing.
No, I'm totally with you there. Father John Whiteford, why outside of Orthodoxy, I'm not going to target anything, but let's just say outside of Orthodoxy, is there a misconception on why America should support Israel so strong?
Well, it goes back to a large extent to the blossoming, you could say, of dispensationalism in America, because most evangelicals today think that they have to support Israel or else they're not a good Christian. And they'll turn a blind eye to the most horrendous atrocities. For example, we've got videotape most recently of Israeli soldiers gang raping a male Palestinian prisoner. And you would think that that would not be something your average Southern Baptist would support, but they'll just turn a blind eye and say, oh, well, that's, a deep fake, or, those are just some rogue people. That doesn't represent Israel, even though they're literally debating this on Israeli television, and people are saying, hey, we have the right to do this because we need to teach these people a lesson, because they're buying all the propaganda about the atrocities that Hamas supposedly committed on October the 7th. And Hamas may very well have committed atrocities on the 7th, but we know that the Israelis have exaggerated them. And the other thing most people don't realize is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict didn't begin on October the 7th.
Right.
So just like the Ukraine war didn't begin when Russia went into Ukraine.
And most American Protestants don't realize that when Israel was established, a quarter of the people there were Christians. And when you hear the stories of Christian villages where the Israelis just came in, even though these were just simple farmers that didn't flee when the war began because they wanted to stay put. There's a documentary called The Stones Cried Out that you can watch that will tell you the whole story of this one village in the Galilee area. But the Israeli military came and said, you've got 3 hours to go to this refugee camp. So they round them all up and take their land, and then these people hired a lawyer who fought their case all the way to the Israeli Supreme Court, and they won. And then the Israeli military just bombed their village, flat, and the Israeli military never handed it back. And then eventually they were invited to work on Israeli farms in the area, so they find themselves picking olives on their own land that was stolen from them. And if you can just imagine what it would be like to be on the receiving end of that kind of persecution, it took a long time before Palestinians started strapping dynamite to themselves and blowing up pizza parlors. It didn't happen right off the bat, but you can understand why people who grow up seeing their families abused over and over and over again, that some people could get to that point. I'm not saying that justifies doing that, but it paints a different picture than your average American is aware of.
Jim, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest problem for the United States is this. I mean, there are a lot of conflicts in the world, and the American mind has this tendency to say, who's the good guy, who's the bad guy? And we're going to come in on both sides, with both feet on the side of the good guy. And whether that's really the good guy or not, or whether there really is a good guy, is another story. I mean, I think a lot of Americans tend, I don't know how many of you have been to Israel. And for Americans, Israel is either this entirely really good thing, God's people, et cetera, everything they do is right, or it's this demon race of people, genocidal monsters, et cetera, every single one of them. And the Palestinians are a mixed bag too. I mean, for example, 50, 60 years ago, the Palestinian movement was largely a secular, nationalist, socialist, even somewhat communist movement. Today, it is a jihad movement. And there's a real problem because, people keep saying, we need a two-state solution. There's not going to be a two-state solution. There's going to be a one-state solution or a no-state solution, depending how things turn out. This can't go anyplace good, but we have our feet planted on one side, and especially given Prime Minister Netanyahu's personal and political problems, he's very strongly trying to push us into a war with Iran, just like Zelensky in Ukraine is trying to get us into a war with Russia. And I don't think there's anybody in Washington who looks at this through the lens of what's in the American national interest. You have a very strong Israel lobby. You have big Jewish money in both parties. Plus, you got the Christian Zionists in the Republican Party. On the Democratic side, you have a little bit of a dissent because you've got your Afro-Asian squad, Islamic lobby there that doesn't like it. They don't care about the national interest any more than the Israeli lobby does. They just have a different tribal allegiance. So this doesn't end well for us. There's no mechanism on our government to say, hold on there. Where is the American interest? It's certainly not getting into a war with anybody at this point, but we're sleepwalking into that direction. That's what worries me most.
Buck, may I add something?
Yes, sir.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say, one of the things I think we need to be most comfortable in saying, and let's do an exercise, shall we? Repeat after me. The church is Israel.
Yes.
The church
is Israel.
Very good. Now, the challenge that we face as American Southern Orthodox Christians, all the rest of it, is saying that not only with confidence, but also with the ability to support it ontologically, epistemologically, and the rest of it by saying, look, this idea that you have got upheld as Israel, this very Jewish secular state, is not at all what we reflect in our hymnody, our psalmody, or any of those other things. That when we are talking about Israel several times in our divine liturgy every single Sunday, we are not talking about a modern Jewish state established in the 1940s. We are talking about an Orthodox Christian understanding of what it means to be God's people. And that is one of those things that it's really awkward to talk to your buddy who's the Southern Baptist, who Pastor Jim Bob has convinced that we've got to go over to the modern state of Israel and whatever they do, we will support, and say, you're off the mark. Here is what it means to be Israel, to be the church, to be God's people, and to uphold that idea in the American South and everywhere else really in this United States. But we have to divorce ourselves from this idea that Israel is this thing that is automatically Jewish, that is automatically Middle Eastern, that is automatically located somewhere other than wherever we find ourselves, our worship, our tabernacles, and our faith. And it's going to be one of those things that really we all just need to educate ourselves as American Orthodox Christians to say, no. The church is Israel. So here we go.
Yes. Jim, you were kind of leading me in without realizing it into my next question.
Can I say something, Buck, real
Yes,
quick?
ma'am. Yes,
I
ma'am.
just want to say one word, scapegoating.
Yes.
I'm a big picture person. It's always about scapegoating. Whatever conflict you want, it's always about scapegoating. Good and bad, this side is pure as the driven snow. This side, complete antichrists. And this is what has been repeated, again, carbon copies over and over and over. Whatever the conflict is, right? Whatever the conflict is. And The Stones Cry Out, that's an interesting documentary. It's so good, I was all enthralled. And then they're interviewing a Palestinian Christian, and he blames Zionism on white supremacy. So I'm like, interesting. See, scapegoats, y'all. It's always about the scapegoat, and we know who it is. white Christian men, specifically Orthodox Christian. So this is what it's all about. So the persecution's coming here, y'all.
Well, then this question's also going to be for you because it's on a topic near and dear to your heart. I'll start off with prefacing it here. Many of you are probably familiar with a gentleman named Darrell Cooper, goes by Martyr Maid. He was on the Tucker Carlson podcast recently, gets into some things, let's say some truths about World War II that are uncomfortable for some people to hear. If you're online on Twitter like myself, there's all kinds of people freaking out. And I think I kind of live in a bubble of sorts in many ways, but one of the ways is for the Southern stuff that I've always liked. Since I was a late teen, I had read The South Was Right by the Kennedy brothers and Tom DiLorenzo's stuff on Lincoln. So I always have this idea, like, obviously Lincoln's the bad guy, obviously. So someone on Twitter, I'll read this tweet, Darrell Cooper, Martyr Maid, says, thank you to the new subscribers, and it shows basically his downloads just jumping massively within a couple of days, like into the, way more than any of us could ever dream of. So this gentleman, I don't know who this is, but his name's Coleman Hughes, and he says, wait until you see that, he's being sarcastic, by the way, wait until you see the next subscriber spike from his next episode, Abraham Lincoln, the real villain of the Civil War. Jokingly.
I mean, yeah.
Well, part of it is like, to Jim's point, there's this, I say this lovingly, but there's this American boomer narrative of like history of like, who's the good guy? But not, you don't have it though. Who's the good guy? Who's the bad guy? And it's got to be such a cartoon, idiotic version of what really happened. There's no nuance. And so to see this, I'm like, wait, what? Abraham, are you still believing like Abraham Lincoln was Honest Abe and he freed the slave, all of this stuff? And then I think maybe I'm in a bubble and that boomer narrative is still out there. Is it largely out there, or is this kind of dying out as Gen X people like Tucker, Darrell Cooper kind of start making waves, making history, I would say, and this kind of old narrative, I hope, is dying off? What do you guys think of this?
Well, I think to some extent it is a generational thing that's also getting farther away from the events where maybe you can talk about them a little more and where people haven't necessarily been conditioned in a certain way. You at least from my point of view, you have to look at World War II in some ways as a continuation of the First World War. It's the long war, 1914 to 1945. It represented power relationships in Europe. Obviously, the second go-around, it represented certain ideologies, National Socialism, Communism, whatever we've got, whatever you want to call it. And you're right. If you want to, the victors write the narrative, and if you want to look at it that way, Roosevelt and Churchill were angels. Hitler was entirely bad. Stalin was good when he was on our side, but bad when he wasn't later. And of course, the world isn't like that. Okay, I'm not going to say Hitler was an angel. He certainly wasn't. Neither was Stalin, for goodness sake. But, Churchill and Roosevelt, they were pretty much crooks too. I mean, and they wanted war. What Hitler wanted, if he wanted war or if he wanted the fruits of a war without war, I don't know. There's a whole dispute about whether Stalin was about to attack Hitler before Hitler attacked him. These things happen in history, and a lot of people die. And in the modern world, with modern weapons, a lot more people die with the means of disposing of people in the modern world. Somebody once said that the World War II and the Eastern Front was a great war to decide whether the concentration camps of the future would be red or brown. That's what it was about, whose concentration camps would be operating. So, I think it is, and of course, there's I'll throw the dead cat on the table, the big H, the Holocaust. How do we discuss that? If you ask any other historical question, how many men died at Antietam? You can talk about that. And if you give a number that's different from somebody else's number, nobody's going to say, well, you just hate so-and-so.
It's called Sharpsburg.
Sharpsburg, yes. First and second men ask. It's okay, I get it, all right? It's not Bull Run. But in any case, what I'm saying is we should at some point be able to talk about history objectively without inferring what the person's hateful motivations are. And maybe we're getting to that point. Maybe we're not. I don't know.
Yes, sir.
Well, I think, there's one of those things that we have a tendency that's very unique in America if you were to go to Washington and look up at the Capitol, you would see the painting, The Apotheosis of Washington. You know, literally, to break down the Greek, the becoming a god of. And we have this tendency, I think, with kind of our national mythology between Washington and Lincoln, war criminal, and, some of these folks to make them into these godlike figures. And one of those things that we have a very unique opportunity as American Orthodox Christians, especially in the South, is there's this very American tendency towards a hagiography of our national heroes. We want to create sort of semi-saint-like ideas of these figures. No matter what their personal foibles, their moral shortcomings might have been, we like to ensconce them as these untouchable figures. And so it I think, in one sense, we're fighting an uphill battle because there are these figures that have already been made godlike. But on the other hand, we have this wonderful opportunity as a relatively young church in the U.S. that we have our American saints, and we need to promote those as these are the ideals of faith. Not this person that may have divided the country politically or on a warmongering basis, but this person that said, despite all of your other political differences, this is the truth of the faith that I bring to you. And so that's one of those things. I think we have these figures. We just need to do a much better job on a PR side of promoting them, going, no, these are the American heroes. St. Peter the Aleut, American hero. Herman of Alaska, American hero. Not necessarily the folks that have taken us into significant and sustained conflict.
Once a month, my supporters of this show and myself and a special guest have a Zoom meeting. It's not recorded, it's not posted, it's just private. It's between you guys, the guest, and myself. I do this because it means a lot for you guys who support me by showing me that this show means a lot to you. I love talking with you. I look at it as like a benefit for people that support the show, but it's really a benefit for me. I get to know you guys and have an off-the-record discussion with our guest. And, sometimes topics you don't want to necessarily have all the ins and outs discussed online, if you know what I mean. So to be in this group, please go to patreon.com/counterflow and donate $5 or more per month. And it gets you in this club. We do it once a month. It's a great time. It's great people. They're all smarter than me. So that's an upgrade from what you're used to. I can tell you that. The guests are always guests that people want to hear from. A lot of you guys will be familiar with many of the guests. Father Turbo's done it. Father Deacon Ananias has done it. David Patrick Harry's done it. My own priest, Father Ignatius, has done it. Father Moses McPherson's done it. It's a very good time, and I think you guys would enjoy it. If you love this content, please go to patreon.com/counterflow, $5 or more per month. Thank you. And just an analogy on that, I'm stealing this from the great Tom Woods, who he also produces, but could you imagine, so these are government schools. You've got these quote unquote icons of American history that you quote unquote worship, that they try to make all these myths up about. No, he couldn't tell a lie. Imagine if all of our schools were owned by Walmart and they had the CEOs of Walmart throughout the decades and the manager, this guy never told a lie. This guy was just the best person of all time. This guy freed slaves. How absurd would that be? But when it's government, we're like, oh no, it's true. We love that. That's great.
It's because America, the ethnos has been shoved to the side, what is left of it, and the religiosity is the ideology. There was the apostate nation from the founders. Abraham Lincoln was the fulfillment, and Martin Luther King was the bookend. We are equality, and whatever that means, and it's changing all the time, that's what it is. That's what the Yankee Empire does. It's always morphing, always changing, and it's whatever they want it to be. And that's when people like us exist who are like, wait, we actually were a people and kind of had an ethnos. That's why we're targeted by feds and government and Fordham, because Fordham wants us to be part of that ideology. They don't want us to have sacramental religion. They want us to be ideological just as much as any old Fed or CIA guy wants us to be. I mean, that was the entire 20th century. It was a psyop, the entire thing. I mean, pretty much. So making people even have a cracking of the veneer about these things is very difficult because Reconstruction is still going on, and it's a formidable foe. But that's what it is. I mean, it's basically truth versus lies. So I don't know. That's why we have in the Capitol building, Washington up on the top, and, the Parthenon is Abraham Lincoln. Those are our holy sites. So it's going to be a long time till we can unbreak that, but it's kind of falling apart anyway.
It may very well be our fault, though. I, for one, have absolutely been judging the Fordhamites for the content of their character or lack thereof.
Speaking of that, I don't want to get too inside baseball here with certain things, but we joke around sometimes like, oh, there's a Fed here. There, I suppose, really were Feds there last year. But in all seriousness, articles like that ran on Father John in Texas Monthly and whatnot, there can be very real consequences to these things that are whether it be a lone crazy person, or I would like Father John to talk about the visit he got after liturgy at his house.
Well, back, prior to that, in the summer of love of 2020, I was sitting at home and had some company, and I got this call. I didn't pick up the phone because I didn't recognize the number, but then I listened to the voicemail that was left, and it was a woman from Colorado that said, you don't know me, and I don't know you, but there's somebody on Reddit who's inviting people to come burn your church down, and I'm not making that threat, mind you, but I just got this message, and I wanted you to be aware of it. So I called this woman back. She sent me a screenshot. So there's this guy. We had his user ID on Reddit making these threats. And so I contacted the FBI. Well, the FBI didn't seem very interested in investigating this. And finally, I knew some people with connections in the Republican Party, so our Lieutenant Governor, Dan Patrick, contacted the FBI, and only then did they show any interest, but they still didn't do anything because, as we know from January 6th, if the federal government actually wants to go after somebody, they can do it. And particularly when you have somebody who's using the internet to make a terroristic threat against a church, it should have been like shooting fish in a barrel. But about maybe 3 or 4 months after all this happened, I got a call from somebody saying, well, they didn't request that these companies preserve their evidence in time, and it's too late, and we're sorry. And only later on, after January 6th, did it occur to me, maybe the FBI wasn't interested in this guy because he actually was an FBI asset, and they were trying to just see who would be interested in burning his church down. Maybe they would have busted the plot before they burned my church down, maybe after. I'd like to know personally, but we wound up spending, thousands of dollars beefing up security at my church. But anyway, long story short, FBI is not interested that there's a terrorist threat against my church. Almost 2 years later, Russia invades Ukraine, and I came home from liturgy on the Feast of the Annunciation on the old calendar, April the 7th, and had my granddaughter on my lap playing her some music, and get a knock on the door, and it's an FBI agent saying, we understand a while back there was some threats against your church, and we were just wanting to make sure that everything was okay. So 2 years passed. The FBI is not interested in doing anything about all this. And then all of a sudden they're interested again. Well, okay. He says, I'd like to come in and ask you some questions. You don't have to, but so I went ahead and let him in my house. I was very careful because I knew what happened to some people like General Michael Flynn, that you can wind up going to jail even if you don't lie to the FBI if they can make a case that you did. So I was very careful to answer all the questions. But once he got in my house, none of the questions involved a terrorist threat against my church almost 2 years prior to this. It was all things like, does the Russian government have any control over your church? Have you had any contact with the Russian consul general? Because there's I don't know if it's still there. It might have been shut down because of the war, but there was a consulate in Houston. And So it was all these kinds of things trying to see if I was going to tell them the truth, because actually I had met the council general once or twice, because he came to the other Rocor parish in Houston for their feast day or Christmas. And I happened to be there on the occasions where he was there. So I was very careful to answer the questions to the best of my knowledge. But that's all the result of all this Russian hoax nonsense, which they're now trying to revive. And that Texas Monthly article, I'm sure that they might one day use that against me and try to say he's a Russian asset. Sarah Carty Schwartz says so. She ought to know. She's got a PhD. And so, yeah, it has real-world consequences, because people can wind up going to prison. But also, some lunatic could just decide, hey, these people are a bunch of Russian spies. I mean, particularly like if America actually got into a direct shooting war with Russia and people were dying, someone might really decide to destroy my church, maybe with the people in it. And so this is all not good. It's things that we should call these people on when they do these things.
Anyone else on any of that?
I was just going to say, I have been on your show before, Buck. It was after the NPR hit piece on Russian Orthodoxy. And we were on a panel.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, so that was also good times. So it's never a dull moment, y'all. That's all I'm going to say.
I'm going to get to some questions from the audience. I don't have to even go down the panel here. Is it hard to not fall into pride and vainglory while posting online? Yes. Do you think there will ever be an American Orthodox church?
A successful one?
As in like one
A
jurisdiction?
unified one?
Jurisdiction.
Yeah.
Jurisdiction. I assume that's what this means.
Give it 2 or 3 centuries. It'll work out.
Yes? Is there a concern that due to the cultural emphasis on academic study or rationalism in America and other Western nations more broadly, that converts may overemphasize or over-intellectualize the faith over and against moral purification and attaining the heart of Christ? Yes.
Yes.
But go ahead.
I would question that we're an overly rational society. I mean, it seems to me that the kind of people who are escaping from the irrationality of our society would have a tendency to do what you said. And whereas they're seeking rationality, they're seeking something that makes sense and maybe come to us with that kind of presupposition, and that only take them so far.
I generally tell people that dislike organized religion that they'll love us because we are horribly disorganized.
Father John?
Well, going back to the unified jurisdiction, I would just say that in some ways the fact that we're not organized is a good thing, because if we had been a unified jurisdiction when the lockdowns were happening, I'm afraid we might have all been locked down and told, you can't come to church unless you have a mask and a certificate that you've been vaccinated. So I'm glad we had options back in 2020.
Well, like they say, the devil can't subvert the Orthodox Church because he can't figure out the organization chart.
Just when he figures it out, he's like, "There's Bulgarians here too."
No.
Like,
Who?
Right.
I mean, if we're talking about the nations, and nations have the Orthodox Church, I would question whether we are a nation. I would say we are a nation state. So, I mean, I get that very much holier people than me, I'm not holy at all, but they get very upset about the multiple jurisdictions. But I mean, it was a saving grace during COVID. And I mean, that's just the way we roll here. I mean, it was, we're not mature enough.
I wonder how many people who
have a
say
church.
we need a single jurisdiction here would say, yes, I want a single jurisdiction under Constantinople.
Right. It would be.
How many would say that,
Right. It would be.
Archbishop Elvira would say so.
Right.
It would be Doctonos. Yeah.
Well, I think it was also a good opportunity for people to really see who is going to align themselves with what they were being told and who was going to do what they believed no matter what they were told. I've made a big deal, and perhaps it's unfair of me because, I mean, we're small potatoes and we're in a small town, and, the mayor lives up the street and all that kind of good stuff. So it's not like we really risked a whole lot, but we never closed our doors. And I make a big thing out of this. Well, thank you. And I make a big thing out of this because I think it is one of those things of, to some extent, yes, do what you are told to do to promote the safety and welfare of those that are entrusted to your care. But to a greater extent, serve the mysteries of the Holy Church that have been entrusted to your care, no matter what you risk. And I think a lot of us at that time, it was one of those of, if we were going to be imprisoned for doing what we did, we were willing to be. If we were going to be called out in public and chastised and admonished and all the rest of it, we were willing to be. But it was one of those things of, first and foremost, was not what we were being told to do, but those for whom we had care of. And that, I think, is one of those things that separates us really from, I guess I'll say boldly, most other jurisdictions, not denominations that are out there. Is, during the COVID and during the ice storm and all that, we said, look, we just don't care. We're going to stay open. We're small potatoes. Come to us. And we had a number of people that were turned away at large denominational churches, the Roman Catholics, the Lutherans, the Anglicans, the Episcopalians, the Methodists. They said, no, we're scared. We don't want to get sick. We're not doing that. We said, we don't care if we get sick. We're here to serve Christ's people. And that is one of those things that I think not only sets Orthodoxy apart, but also gives us a significant advantage in church planting, in mission building, in this time, in this country, where we're seeing a lot of people go, I don't want to get in trouble. We're going to close down early today. We have the opportunity. It has been presented to each and every one of us to go, nah, I'm going to stay open today. I'm going to stay open. I'm going to serve God's people because it's the right thing to do. It's the thing that is needful among his people, and to hell with what we're told. I can spend the night in jail.
One advantage we had in Texas, though, is that our governor actually issued an order forbidding any local entity from shutting down churches. And since then, we've actually passed a constitutional amendment that is enshrined in the Texas Constitution that no church could ever be shut down by any official in the state.
Didn't stop them from trying.
So the thing is, when people say it doesn't matter who you vote for, well, I would say it does in a case like that. Who you vote for, particularly locally, is more important even than the national races. But I also think that God, we have multiple jurisdictions, you could say, because of sin. But on the other hand, God takes even bad things and he brings good about from them. And I think the fact that we have multiple jurisdictions was a result of God's providence, because in Texas, at least, it wasn't the government that you had to worry about. It was the bishops, and it depended on which jurisdiction you were in. And the only jurisdiction that had no restrictions were the Serbs. And the funny thing about that is there's a priest I've known forever from Galveston. Well, he's from Australia originally, but he was in Galveston. He's actually just now been reassigned back there. But he told a joke years ago. There was a Greek, a Russian, and a Serb that were in a bar. And the Greek said, we Greeks gave the church great theology. And the Russian said, we Russians gave the church great music. And then the Serb said, well, we Serbs don't really understand our faith, but we'll fight to the death for it. And that joke actually proved to be true. Because Patriarch Pavel actually died of COVID, and even after he died of COVID, they still refused to shut down there in Serbia or in the United States. So every jurisdiction has some things they do well. Well, the Serbs are good at being stubborn and not letting people tell them what to do.
And God bless them.
Yep.
And Father Iggy said, troublemakers. Well, being Orthodox, we're troublemakers. We lose friends, we lose family. People think we're in a cult, all sorts of things happen. Just doing that from, this culture we're in, we're already looked at like we have two heads. So, we're just troublemaker. It's just easy to be a troublemaker for something as simple as, hey, let's serve the Eucharist and have the doors open. It's easy if you think about it that way, Let's just be troublemakers, but for good,
All right, I got One last topic, kind of on the way out of here, so it's not extremely controversial. It's kind of easy one. I was recently on a trip overseas with a priest that I respect a lot and got to talk with. And I guess this is mainly for the priests here. What if someone is a convert, they go through the catechumen period, and they say, do I get baptized? Do I get chrismated? What happens?
Well, in ROCOR, the only question is you're going to get baptized, and is there, unless they raise a really good reason why they shouldn't be, that's how they're received. So that's not a big deal for us. But and I get questions from people who are going to other parishes, and it's a difficult question because there is precedent, and a lot of precedent for receiving, say, Roman Catholics by economia. But on the other hand, there's a lot of precedent for not doing that too. It's a difficult question. I generally tell people that unless there's a super compelling reason why you shouldn't do what your bishop is telling you to do, then just do what your bishop is telling you to do, and it's going to be on him if it's wrong. But on the other hand, if you have the ability, if it's bothering you especially, and you have the ability to go to a parish where that's not going to be an issue, that's something you might want to pray about and consider.
I would say in my instance, I was baptized as a Roman Catholic as a young man through effusion, through pouring. And one of my great regrets is that when I was received into ROCOR, it was via Chrismation, that I was not baptized what I would say properly. And I encounter a number of folks who, so one situation I encountered, this was actually when I was an Anglican priest, is there had been a group of folks who, as Presbyterians in the 1950s, had been baptized with rose petals because, well, it was prettier than water and less messy. And we didn't find this out until several months in, and we were like, we need to fix this, most Ricky Tick. And so there are situations like that where, it ought to be done. But I think, one of those things is, as a priest, I was chrismated, and I was sent home and said, all right, chrismate your wife, chrismate your children, and, report back. And I was never baptized as an Orthodox Christian. I was never crowned. And, that's one of those things. The crowning is one of the coolest things that we do. And Matushka and I can't be crowned because, there is that. So our sacraments are some of the most beautiful things. The mysteries of the Holy Church are there for a reason. They're glorious and they're gorgeous. And I encourage everybody to go through them in their wholeness and their totality because I regret not having experienced them. So that is one of those things where I think just beyond, not necessarily a corrective sense, but in a, wouldn't you want the fullness of all of those mysteries of the church to really form who you are and who you define yourself as an Orthodox Christian? So that's kind of my take on it.
I've heard that from personal friends very many times. I was chrismated. I wish I was baptized. Have you ever heard someone say, I was baptized, I wish I was chrismated?
Nope.
No, that never happens. And the thing is I often have people come to me after the fact and say, I was received by Chrismation, I have doubts about it, and I try to tell them, unless there was, like if they were baptized in the name of Jesus only or something like that, which I've heard of cases like that happening, where they were received by Chrismation, which obviously should never happen by any stretch, that basically the bishops have the power to bind and to loose. You were received the way your bishop said you were supposed to be received. And if it was wrong, it's on him. So don't let that trouble you. But the thing is, it would not trouble people if it wasn't an issue.
Right.
And I think as a rule, receiving people by baptism is the way that it should be done, even Roman Catholics, because particularly since Vatican II, you don't really know how someone was baptized unless you have a videotape of it. And that's even all the more true of Protestants, even evangelicals. Because evangelicals don't have a sacramental theology. They really don't think baptism means anything. And I've heard evangelical pastors who even believe in the Trinity say, sometimes I baptize people in the name of Jesus, and sometimes I baptize them in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Well, because they don't care. They don't think that it matters. So you might have a baptismal certificate that says this person was baptized, and it might even say they were baptized in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, but it doesn't mean that that's actually what happened. So I think it's better to err on the side of caution.
Jim, I know you have thoughts on this.
No, I just think the final point you made is the important one, is that doing it by baptism is the safe way to do it. It closes the door to all regrets. But that having been said, the grace is in the church. And I think that that's where we want to make sure we stand on that ground. Because, like, for example, in Serbia, almost nobody's baptized by immersion. Almost everybody's baptized by aspersion. They just got out of the habit of it. How many of us want to say the whole nation of Serbia is not Orthodox because they're being baptized in a way that's only supposed to be for extraordinary purposes, but there it's become ordinary. But nonetheless, the grace is in the church, and I think we need to make sure we stand on that and not shake people's faith ex post facto and say, well, they did it wrong, now it needs to be done again, or the right way. Because it's it's not magic. It's a sacrament.
All right, one more, and Conrad, you didn't know this was coming. You and I are going to do an episode on our trip to Mount Athos and what it meant. Can you tell people who have not been? So can you tell the women in here that? No, I'm joking. Talk about what Mount Athos meant to you, what it was like. Just kind of give a quick summation, and before we do the episode on it.
Sure. Yeah, I had the blessing of going with Father Peter. He invited me and Seraphim and David Erhan and some other people you might know from the internet and some other people that aren't on the internet by the grace of God. They to Mount Athos, and I even went to Cyprus for a few days with them before, which was beautiful as well. So it was a dream come true, really. And going to Mount Athos, I mean, we did the full Father Peter experience. We were at 2 all-night vigils. We walked. We only went to the places nobody concelebrated with the Ukrainian schismatics. So we had all of our bases covered on doing it the right way. And even then, so you got to expect. I mean, if people that are going to go or people that want to understand what to expect, I mean, things will happen that you won't expect, and people have said that you got to listen to God. It won't really always feel like God when you've accidentally skipped 2 meals and you're like about to die hiking up a mountain, but you feel God in those moments as well. And the services are beautiful. Even though I can't understand Greek, I was able to get a lot out of the services. Of course, the choral singing is some of the most beautiful you'll ever hear. The all-male Byzantine chant. We got to experience a big earthquake at one of the monasteries, which was slightly scary, but everyone was fine.
4.3 on the Richter scale.
And how many people could say, I went to Mount Athos with a Turk?
That's true. We were with that was always great.
That was a huge deal. Almost every place we went, he's from Turkey.
Yeah, that was. Oh yeah, they're like Americans and Turks, and these Greeks are like, oh, okay.
Turk. And Father Peter Heers didn't know I was going to do this, but Father, could you come up and sit next to Conrad really quick? It was just special, and Conrad and I are going to do an episode on it, but I want you to kind of give, in a nutshell, if you will, your thoughts on Mount Athos, maybe our trip. You've been there 40 or 50 times. Just some stuff for the people.
That was the best one of all the 50 times, right?
Yes, and this, ladies and gentlemen, Father Peter Heers is my competition every Tuesday night. My podcast drops at the exact same time that he live streams. So, but I love him much.
I'm competing with one of my podcasts right now, in other words.
That's long.
The Athos is very special for many, many reasons. One of it is that it's the garden of the Theotokos. And she protects her garden and orders everything according to the providence of God. And you feel that in many, many times. This time we went down to the desert of Athos, and we had so many adventures. Some things we didn't really like, and I think that's part of it. So much of going to Athos is so much like life. It's just like life, we run into things we don't expect, and all of it is governed by God's providence. And so you abandon yourself to God's providence. You trust. It's the heart of everything that happens in the church, and so much more on Athos is that the providence of God is over everything. God's over all His works, as it says in the scriptures, and you feel that intensely. And you kind of leave the order and the rules of the world behind, and you live in this almost twilight zone. It's like you come into another way, another place. The hospitality of the fathers, the prayers of the fathers are felt so strongly there, and you forget You forget about the world. When you come out, you're kind of shocked. You're like, where am I? Am I back in this this other existence? So I think it's every pious Orthodox male should be planning his pilgrimage to Athos at some point, because it's the 1,000 years, the arc of Orthodoxy in many ways. How many times did it rejuvenate the church? How many times did missionaries come from Athos to Africa and to the north? And so, yeah, I don't know. You could go on for hours. You could do a couple shows on Athos. You can do one with Conrad. So yeah, it's a very, very special place. I think it's the heart, for me, it's the heart of Orthodoxy today, for the last 1,000 years, but especially today, because of so many saints and because of the ascetic struggles of the fathers, the prayers they offer, the divine liturgies, hundreds of them every day, all around, all just in one little peninsula, hundreds and hundreds of divine liturgies being offered. It transforms the place into a little earthly paradise.
Yes, and can you talk about, I asked you when we were there, I said, why did you pick Conrad and myself? And I can let this out now. You've talked about it with your brother on an episode. It was going to be Alex Jones, but he couldn't make the trip. But I said, why did you pick us? So talk about the last few years you've gone and I know you're humble and you're not bragging, but just say who you've taken, why you've taken people, because I think that's very special.
So back about 12 years ago, I guess, I forget now, 2013, we started this idea. We had this idea of bringing folks over from the United States, especially seminarians and especially people who were working for the church. Father Joseph Honeycutt joined us, who's here. I think he's here. He's in the conference this weekend. And the idea was that, give them an opportunity to spend 5-6 days in the Holy Mountain. We also had professors from the university, Father Theodore Zisis, Professor Chalingidis, to come to the village where I lived at the time, and I was a priest, and give them just a special but intense, like, boot camp, as it were, in Orthodoxy for those who had never experienced it. And so Orthodoxy is it's a living tradition. It's every generation has to repeat what they lived close to the Savior. Like the Apostle John said, we saw, we heard, we touched. This experience of God himself is necessary for each human being and each generation. And so, studying theology is great, but living this mystery of this unique place in Orthodoxy, this garden of Theotokos, we thought it would be extremely impactful, and it has been. We did it 6 times, I think, and I think you're the 7th. And everyone almost universally comes back and says, this has been tremendously impactful in our life. So we saw that, we lived it ourselves, and so we wanted to give it to as many people as possible. It's not easy to do for many reasons. It takes a long time to plan. So we haven't done it as much as I would wish, but hopefully we'll keep doing it in the future.
Yeah, it was super special. It's just, you had taken priests in the past, like you mentioned, Father Joseph, seminary students, and it's like, you stooped so low to grab up some dorky podcasters. Like, my goodness. But I'm extremely thankful. And this is a pertinent question on this topic I just got from the audience. Is there a female majority, female only equivalent to Mount Athos with nuns?
I mean, exactly like Athos, no, but there are many monasteries in Greece as well, but all around the Orthodox world. But in Greece, there are monasteries where they're basically Athonite monasteries for women. In other words, there's monasteries started by Athonite elders, like Ormelia or Thasos, the monastery where all the sisters came from Elder Ephraim brought over to America. There's monasteries like in Sardis, north of. These are all started by Athonite elders, and so you can go to some of those monasteries in the northern Greece and experience a very similar liturgical life and a very intense spiritual life. So, but that's true all around the Orthodox world. I mean, yes, the experience of Athos is unrepeatable, but at the same time, it's the same experience of the church all around the world. So we don't want to make it so utterly other that women think, oh, this is like, I'm deprived. It's the heart of the Orthodox Church, just like in any monastery. Yeah.
Yes, it's very humbling, very beautiful, and I'm thankful that I got to go to this. Father Peter Heers, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Father Ignatius, can we get you back up and we'll do some closing remarks for everyone? I just want to go down the line here and kind of give your thoughts on this event that, not this Counterflow podcast, but the Philip Ludwell III second annual conference that we're doing, what it means to you, what you'd like people to know about it, and we'll start with you, Jim.
Well, first, I'm honored to be speaking at the second conference. I attended the first one; it was really great. And as I said earlier, I think we're going through a very rough transitional phase here in this country, and I think that what we have to say here will help shape the consciousness of Orthodox people and people who I hope in the future will become Orthodox, in equipping them for an ordeal that otherwise they wouldn't be ready for. I mean, if we look at the church as the ark of salvation and we're coming into rough seas, you want to be on that ark and have at least that degree of confidence that you can withstand what's coming. And that's going to be true throughout the United States. It's going to be true in the South. And I think we're offering, and I don't want to be too negative about other religious communities, but they're not going to get you through this. And I hope that people become conscious of what we're offering here. It's all we can do.
So as the person who put on the last conference, I planned it, and then Ben Dixon led this one, and I was his assistant. I mean, the fellowship is about, it's that the South is a good fit. So, Alan Tate, one of the Southern agrarians, said, the South, we are a sacramental people without a sacramental religion. Orthodoxy is the missing link. It just is what it is. The South did endure. I've talked about that this evening. I've written about that. I've talked about it for years. But there's something square peg, round hole about the South. Orthodoxy is round peg, round hole. It is not easy, but it is the missing link. And it is the thing that is going to get Southerners through, and people who live here, who have planted roots. You don't have to be born in the South, but it's a beautiful thing. And it's true because the powers that be hate Southern Orthodoxy. They hate the fellowship. They hate Orthodoxy.
And they hate the South.
And they hate the South. So whatever they hate, is correct. So that's us. Welcome.
The fellowship really has a missionary purpose, and the thing is that there are things about Southern culture that are good, true, and beautiful, and there are people in this area of the country that we want to help connect them with Orthodoxy, because they can better see those things that are good, true, and beautiful when they're connected with the fullness of the truth that you find in the Orthodox Church. And so that's what we're trying to do, is to spread Orthodoxy here. And I think we've had a good mix of sort of informing people about Southern culture and how it could connect with Orthodoxy. But today we had a good practical talk about missionary kinds of stuff related to church music. And I hope that we'll continue to keep that focus, because it not only helps people discover Orthodoxy when they run across the videos that we'll eventually post online, but it also helps the people who are already Orthodox better understand how can we connect with these people.
I think it's one of the most important projects going on in the Christian world, because people, Southern Orthodoxy, so small, less than 1% of the population, like Father Filaret said. But I think the fact that this is one of the most Christian parts of the world in general, the Bible Belt, there's certain states in here that I think are like the most concentrated group of self-professing Christians in some capacity, and even the entire world still. And the fact that the mission is here and doing things is going to be really important as America goes through these really hard times, because in many ways, becoming Orthodox does involve shedding a bit of an Americanism. And in many ways, these Southerners, I think, without understanding it, would love to do that. They've been, it's been occupied for so long that they perhaps don't know where the South begins and America, the nation state that Rebecca talks about really begins. And I think some of those ideas, while then elevating some of the more traditional Southern ideas, would I don't want to talk about ethnogenesis, but it would create a new civilization and a culture that would, I think, like she said, it would be that puzzle piece that would fit. And I think, maybe America won't be holy, but maybe the 3 or 4 nations that come out of America afterwards, some of those can be holy, like St. Paisios said.
So for my own part, it's offering to host the conference here was born out of both pride and desperation. Pride in the sense that...
Is this a confession?
A little bit. Pride in the sense that I think we're doing something really cool here. We are presenting historic and beautiful Orthodox Christianity in our case, in the Russian tradition, in small town Texas, in the middle of, there are 47 churches here, 23 of which are some variety of Baptist. So that gets me into the desperation side. When Rebecca interviewed me last year and I said, not only are we supporting this, we want to host it this year. And then she called my bluff. And since then, it's been preparation, but it's also been this interest in showing everyone really that attends, but also that watches these materials after the fact is, as I hope you will see tomorrow evening in Vespers and Sunday morning in liturgy, we're in a space not a whole lot bigger than this room. In fact, I think it may actually be smaller. And some Sundays we have 30 people in there. Some Sundays we have 80 people in there. And it is the possibility, I think, of showing folks that Orthodoxy is not something that is celebrated exclusively in beautiful cathedrals on the East and West Coast. It is not something that's just in large parishes with massive endowments. It's also in 700 square foot former apartments that have a ikonostasis built by a carpenter turned priest who has no idea what he's doing. Autobiographical. And that we're trying to make this thing happen in a place where it is not naturally found. And so something that comes out of this is part of our American experience, and specifically our Southern experience as Orthodox Christians, is we don't have these huge cathedrals on the coasts. We don't have these massive endowments from generations of people who have left to the church. We have tiny spaces, very frequently storefronts, and we are doing the best that we possibly can to do the most to serve the liturgy, to serve the other mysteries as well as we possibly can with very limited resources, with next to no support, out here kind of on the Wild West frontier as best we can. And so it was very important to me that we show folks, yourselves especially, that this is something that is worth your time, your attention, and your efforts as you go back home to say, let us take these small missions that are, I don't want to say struggling, we're actually thriving in a small community in the midst of the mostly Baptist and Roman Catholic contingent, and let us build them into something that we can say, that is the foundation of our Southern American Orthodox Christian experience, that some people can someday go, that's where we began, and this is what we've grown into. So that's really kind of what I hope comes out of all of this.
Well said. Thank you to Jim Jatras, Rebecca Dillingham, Dissident Mama. Thank you, Father John Whiteford. Thank you, Conrad Franz from World War Now. Thank you, Father Ignatius, for being part of this panel and for hosting, playing part of the home parish, the host parish, if you will. And to my Podsworth Media Counterflow crew, Chris, Ben, Bobby, Jojo, Emily, and Amanda. Thank you, guys. And we will do a closing prayer, and we will get out of here.
It is truly meet to bless thee, the Theotokos, ever blessed and most blameless and mother of our God, more honorable than the cherubim, and beyond compare more glorious than the seraphim, who without corruption gavest birth to God the Word. The very Theotokos thee do we magnify. Good night, everybody.
Thank you, guys. All right, I hope you guys liked this production, this episode we have. Thank you to this wonderful panel of guests. Thank you to the Counterflow crew that helped me out with this. Chris, Bobby, Emily, Amanda, Jojo. I had a lot of close people to me helping me do this, and I could not have done it without them. And until next week, you guys have a good one.
You get split in half, like on the hologram graph. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid, and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Like the sound of the Counterflow podcast? Our audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.